1989. George H.W. Bush was inaugurated as President of the United States. The Berlin Wall collapsed. Heavyweight Mike Tyson went through a divorce with actress Robin Givens. It was finalized on February 14th. In the home media industry, Oz Mania broke out in the United States with the release of the 50th anniversary of The Wizard of Oz on home video, which was backed by an $8 million promotional campaign. In the film industry, two well-known animated films hit the box office in time for the holiday season: All Dogs Go to Heaven and The Little Mermaid. Universal's Back to the Future Part 2 and The Wizard also hit theaters by the end of the year. The latter is a film rife with Nintendo products, including the upcoming Super Mario Bros. 3. In the television industry, the Super Mario Bros. Super Show, Captain N the Game Master, Shining Time Station, America's Funniest Home Videos, Saved by the Bell, and Family Matters premiered on television. In growing pains, Carol Seaver suffered a traumatic loss.
Carol, Sandy just died.
What happened to his second chance?
In the video game industry, NEC released their 16-bit PC engine system as the TurboGrafx-16 in North America. Nintendo released their 8-bit handheld system, the Game Boy. Many units came with a copy of the popular Russian puzzle game, Tetris. Later that year, Nintendo released the game on the Nintendo Entertainment System. And then there was Sega. After their Master System failed to make waves in North America, it was time to move on and release the North American version of the 16-bit system they released in Japan a year prior. A console with attitude. A console that helped redefine gaming. A console that would cut into Nintendo's market share. Gaming Delight presents its retrospective on the Sega Genesis. Ah, the Genesis. I mean, sure, the Master System did have its fans, but the Genesis managed to succeed where its predecessor failed in North America. It was a system for hardcore gamers. Before the ESRB came around, Sega always had the mature games, while Nintendo maintained a family-friendly image. But how did the Genesis come to be, and why was it more successful in North America and Europe than in Japan? Our story begins in Japan in 1988. The Sega Mark III wasn't performing nearly as well as Nintendo's family computer, and NEC's 16-bit PC engine, released a year prior, was starting to make waves. Even the Japanese version of the North American Sega Master System wasn't doing anything. So, Sega's console research and development team got to work on the Master System's successor. The team was led by Masami Ichikawa, with Hideki Sato supervising. To stay competitive with Nintendo and NEC, Ichikawa and the team elected to incorporate a 16-bit microprocessor into the new console, one that would nearly come toe-to-toe with Sega's own System 16 arcade board. The System 16 arcade board, released in 1985, was known for heavy hitters from Sega such as Fantasy Zone and Quartet. Most of these games were ported to the Mark III/Master System. The arcade board itself utilized a Motorola 68000 and a Zilog Z80 for CPU. Sega's console R&D team decided to build the Master System successor around these processors. Said Masami Ichikawa, yes, the designs for the graphics parts had already begun, and we had an issue regarding the cost, as it was quite a late stage when he decided the main CPU would be the 68000. The reason we used two CPUs was because we believed that the load would be too heavy had we used one to handle both sound and visuals. Due to that reason, we used the Z80 as a sub-CPU to handle the sound, which reduced the load on the main CPU while maintaining compatibility. However, the 68000 proved to be quite expensive for a video game console, Having it alone likely would have driven the price up. Sega decided to negotiate with the distributor to have the chips sold at only 10% of the price and promised more orders, pending the new console's future success. The look of the system was designed by a team under the leadership of Mitsushige Shiraiwa, taking inspiration from automobiles and equipment for audiophiles. Shiraiwa hoped that this system would attract gamers of all ages, compared to the Famicom, which was usually aimed at children. In June of 1988, the system was announced in the Japanese publication Beep, under the name Mark V. But the higher-ups at Sega felt it needed a more appealing name. After going through over 300 ideas, they decided on the name Mega Drive. The Mega Drive featured a power switch, a blue reset button, 2 controller ports reminiscent of the Master System in Atari 2600 and 7800, a jack for headphones or external speakers, and a volume slider for the jack. On the dome below the cartridge slot, in large gold letters, 16-bit, Sega's way of emphasizing it was the first true 16-bit machine. On the lower right side of the system was an expansion port for hardware add-ons. One plan was a floppy disk drive, which, like its predecessor for the Master System, ultimately never got released. On the back was the AC adapter port, the multi-AV out port, and a 9-pin extension port, which was intended for a modem to allow for an early, albeit not totally new, form of online gameplay. The controllers, also known as control pads, were kidney bean shaped and had 3 trigger buttons on the right, lettered A, B, and C. Just above it was a blue start button. On the middle was the Sega logo. On the left was the directional button, or D button, with 8 arrows. On October 29, 1988, the Mega Drive was released in Japan. It launched with 2 games, Super Thunderblade and Space Harrier 2. Reviews for the system and the 2 launch titles were glowing. However, Nintendo had released Super Mario Bros. 3 for the Famicom a week earlier, thus overshadowing the Mega Drive's launch. Within its first year on the market, Sega only managed to sell over 400,000 units. The system didn't cut well into Nintendo and NEC's market share, but Sega was willing to change all that. Gaming Delight will return in a moment.
最近ゲームがつまらない、ハマらない、そんな噂が飛び交ってるけど、それはソフトのせいじゃない。ハードに限界があったからだ。セガメガドライブ16ビット CPU 搭載。限界のバリアをぶち破って見せる、迫る、うなる。ビジュアルショック、スピードショック、サウンドショック。
時代が求めた16ビットセガメガドライブ。
ウオンセガ、セガメガドライブ、ウオンセガ、セガメガドライブ16ビットソフトシリーズが面白さぶっちぎりでドッカンとデビュー。ハマっちゃう。まずは10号機。グラフィックもキャラクターもグイッとリアルでこいつはぶっ飛ぶ SFX。そしてスペースハリアー2、スーパーサンダーブレード。やっぱゲームは16ビットじゃないとつまんない。よーホンボイ。
As Sega launched the Mega Drive in Japan, their Master System in North America was falling behind the Nintendo Entertainment System and was barely neck and neck with the Atari 7800. There are many claims as to why. Some assume they had to do with Nintendo's strict licensing policies at the time to avoid a repeat of the North American video game crash of 1983. Others believe Sega wanted to focus more on ports of their own arcade hits. Regardless, the Master System only sold under 2 million units in North America, despite gaining a huge following in Europe and South America.
Do me a favor, plug me into a Sega.
By the end of 1988, Nintendo had command of over 83% of the video game market. Sega was ready to move on to the next generation, and with NEC planning to release the PC Engine in North America as the TurboGrafx 16, bringing the Mega Drive to the West was a no-brainer. On January 9th, 1989, Sega announced that the Mega Drive was coming to North America, but under a new name. At the behest of Sega's co-founder David Rosen, the name of the system was changed from Mega Drive to Genesis. With no North American sales and marketing division at the time, Rosen tried to broker a deal with Atari Corporation, the same company that released and distributed the Atari 7800. He made his proposal to CEO Jack Tramiel and Atari Corp's Entertainment Electronics Division President Michael Katz. They came so close to sealing the deal, but it ultimately fell through for a number of reasons. Tramiel deemed the console too pricey and preferred to focus Atari Corp's resources toward their line of Atari home computers.
We were originally hired to write games for the Tomahawk. That was the name that Sega gave their new Mega Drive system for North America. From what I know, Atari VP Larry Siegel had been brokering a deal where I believe Atari would be the North American, possibly worldwide distributor for the system and its games. Sega was looking for an aggressive American name for the console. That's what led to the name Tomahawk, but we didn't like it very much. We had an office contest to see who could come up with a better name. I think the prize was a steak dinner. Steve Rhino came up with the name Genesis, either as the console that would redefine gaming or after the effect in the Star Trek II movie. Either way, it stuck. The deal later fell through, and I don't know if Steve ever got his prize, but that's seriously how the Sega Genesis got its name. Scott D. Williamson, Atari Age.
Having been rejected by Atari Corporation, and Tonka having failed to give the Master System any sort of headway, Sega decided to simply distribute the Genesis through their North American division, Sega of America. The Genesis was given a few tweaks in its design. The large 16-bit lettering was shrunk down and changed from gold to silver, and right below the cartridge slot was the Sega Genesis logo. On the upper arc of the dome was the phrase High Definition Graphics. The reset button was changed from blue to gray. The controllers also got a few changes. The start button was changed from blue to gray, and the Sega logo in the middle was replaced with the Genesis logo. On August 14, 1989, the Sega Genesis was released in New York and Los Angeles at a retail price of $189.99. The package included the Genesis, a controller, an RF cable, and a copy of Altered Beast. Early advertisements featured the tagline, "Your world will never be the same." PAL Territories would also receive a release in September of 1990. Gaming Delight will return in a moment.
And so it was, late in the 20th century, that a pox fell upon the land, a plague of home videos that were limited in intelligence. There was brain drain, and terminal boredom swept the countryside. The maker looked down and was not pleased by what he saw, and said, "This is not good." And so it was, he brought forth Genesis, a system with twice the power, twice the intelligence, twice the challenge, twice the fun. Only a chosen few were called forth to experience this new dimension of high-definition graphics and stereo sound. And the maker saw what he had done and said, "Now that's not bad. Discover Genesis, and your world will never be the same."
Now let's go over the 6 titles that launched with the Sega Genesis in North America in 1989, starting with the pack-in title. The Sega System 16 arcade game, Altered Beast, released to arcades in June of 1988, was designed by Makoto Uchida, who went on to create arcade hits such as Golden Axe. When he designed Altered Beast, Uchida took inspiration from Michael Jackson's Thriller music video, the horror film The Howling, and films by Ray Harryhausen. Most notably, Harryhausen's stop-motion visual effects from films like Clash of the Titans. The arcade game proved to be successful enough for Sega to port to home consoles. The Mega Drive port came first on November 27, 1988. 9 months later, it became the North American pack-in title. I'd already talked about Altered Beast in my first unboxing episode, but I didn't go into full detail. It's an auto-scrolling beat-em-up set in ancient Greece. You play as a centurion resurrected by Zeus to rescue his kidnapped daughter Athena from the evil Neph.
Rise from your grave.
In between each level is a crushing cutscene where Neff slowly transforms Athena into a bird. In each of the 5 levels, your job is to fight your way to Neff by beating up enemies such as, in the first level, self-destructing zombies, flying dragons, and Cerberus-like wolves. Press A to punch, B to kick, and C to jump. At least these are the standard controls. Every enemy you beat scores you. Beating a blue wolf also releases a power spear. Power up! Which, when grabbed, simply buffs your Centurion and boosts your power with every spear you grab. Get 3 and... Yes, the Altered Beast transformation. In the first level, you take the form of a werewolf. Pressing A shoots out projectiles. Pressing B lets you ram through your enemies. In your first battle against Neff, he takes the form of Agar, an ogre-like monster made from corpses. He throws many a rock in the shape of his original head down at your Centurion, but they're also vulnerable to your attacks. After you beat Neff, it's on to the next level, where your Altered Beast form is a flying dragon that shoots electric projectiles with the push of the A button, or unleashes electricity from his body with the push of the B button.
Welcome to your doom!
Neff takes the form of Octais, a creature with numerous eyeballs. The best way to beat him is to get close to him and mash the B button as fast as you can. In level 3, you traverse through a murky cavern, dealing with ogres, turtles, and insects. Your Altered Beast form here is a grizzly bear. Pressing the A button lets him shoot a projectile that turns some enemies to stone. Pressing B lets him jump in a protected ball, rendering enemy attacks useless. Neff takes the form of Moldy Snail, a snail-like creature that I recommend you attack from within. Level 4 is very rewarding. Aside from a couple enemies from previous levels, you also have to take on a few flying demons that attack from above with mallets. Your Altered Beast form in this level is a tiger that is almost the same as the werewolf, except the B button lets him attack vertically, and the A button lets him shoot a continuous yellow projectile. Neff's form in this level is Crocodile Worm, a dragon-like head with a devastating spear on his chin that you mustn't touch. The 5th and final level, your Altered Beast form is a gold version of the werewolf from the first level. Same moveset as the original. Neff's final form is Van Vader, a rhinoceros that merely charges at you left and right, but his attacks are still powerful. Luckily, your ramming attacks are sure to beat him with no trouble, as long as you time your moves right. Once you beat Neff there, that's it. With Neff gone, his spell is broken, and Athena is set free. Altered Beast was the original pack-in title for the Sega Genesis when it launched, and it stayed that way for 2 years. It wasn't until the summer of 1991 when Altered Beast was replaced with a certain Speedy Blue Hedgehog. As for the game itself, I really enjoy it. A challenge, yes, but the options menu does let you change the difficulty settings. That aside, the transformation sequences really stand out, even if they're not as good as the original arcade version. Gameplay-wise, beating up on these hideous creatures really works for me. The second Neff boss, it's a breeze. I consider it one of my all-time favorite Genesis games. Too bad Electronic Gaming Monthly doesn't see it that way. But come on, who's to say that Altered Beast is perfect? No game ever is. True, an average player can beat the game in less than 15 minutes, but what it lacks in longevity, it makes up for in challenge. There's more to a good game than how long you play. Want to pick this up? It's inexpensive, even complete. I chalk it up to the game being a packing title for the Genesis. It's also available on many Sega compilations for other consoles, and the Genesis Mini, but I'd steer away from Sega Smash Pack Volume 1 for the Dreamcast if I were you. Space Harrier 2, the sequel to Sega's massive arcade hit, Space Harrier. Both this game and its predecessor were designed by Yu Suzuki, one of Sega's finest designers of all time. Space Harrier 2 actually feels more like a port of the arcade original, but there are a few small differences. Aside from the inevitable scale downs due to hardware limitations, you get to choose a stage from which to start, but in order to see the final stage, you have to take on all the bosses from the very beginning. The music was composed by Tokuhiko Uobo, mostly known for his work on Phantasy Star on the Master System and its 16-bit sequel. Now, despite the hardware limitations, the graphics almost make this game look totally 3D. It also has digitized speech, and it sounds really good.
Get ready!
But keep in mind, it's another one of those games that are easy to learn yet difficult to master. Despite that, I consider this game my second favorite of the 6 launch titles, just behind Altered Beast. Super Thunderblade, the other Japanese launch title, is a rail shooter and a follow-up to the 1987 arcade game Thunderblade, which was also ported to the Master System and numerous home computers. In Super Thunderblade, you control a helicopter fighting enemy guerrillas. You fire upon them with various projectiles. Like Space Harrier, this game uses a third-person perspective, until you fight a boss, during which time the camera switches to a top-down perspective. But unlike the original arcade game, raising and lowering the ship can't be done in this mode. I'd chalk that up to the limitations of the home console. Now, I'm not a fan of its frame rate, but then again, what's to expect of a 16-bit rail shooter from 1989? The game received good reviews from critics. The UK magazine Computer and Video Games gave it an 80% rating, stating it was the best version of Thunderblade on any console. While I agree with that, the choppy frame rate and lack of scaling don't sit too well with me, but I understand the limitations. On the other hand, Space Harrier 2 gave me the impression of actual 3D. Super Thunderblade didn't. This gets 4th place from me. Tommy Lasorda Baseball, known as Super League in Japan, is the first Sega Genesis game to be endorsed by a celebrity. This was Sega's way of trying to get the Genesis to resonate with North American gamers. Of course, Sega had also signed a deal with golfer Arnold Palmer, though his game wouldn't be out until September. Tommy Lasorda was an MLB pitcher for the Brooklyn Dodgers before he was sold to the Kansas City Athletics in 1956. At the time he signed the endorsement deal with Sega, he was a manager for the Los Angeles Dodgers. By then, his team had won 2 World Series, and Lasorda himself had won 2 National League Manager of the Year awards. He also had quite a few other endorsement deals.
A day at the park is a little too much for Tommy Lasorda, so he reaches for relief, Rolaids, and acid.
The Amiga computer. What can it do? Well, what do you want it to do?
I need some more help.
Despite having an MLB manager endorsing the game, Tommy Lasorda Baseball didn't have a license from Major League Baseball or the MLB Players Association. Therefore, no real team names, no real player names. You can only identify the teams by city and the players by numbers and random names. The Japanese version was the same way. You can choose to play an open game, a single game against the computer, an exhibition game against another player, or a 30-game season against the computer. The game has a password-based save system, so when you play a 30-game season, you can use your password to pick up where you left off. Visually, the game looks impressive, and a major improvement from 8-bit baseball games. The same can be said for the music, realistic sound effects, and digitized speech.
Right!
Undoubtedly one of the better baseball games on the Genesis, and possibly the entire 16-bit generation. Too bad I'm not a huge fan of sports games.
Right! Out!
I wish I didn't have to do this, and you'll understand why shortly. But I have to discuss all 6 launch titles in this video, so here we go. Last Battle is a reworked version of Hokuto no Ken, Shin Sekimatsu Kyuseishu Densetsu, released on July 1st, 1989 in Japan as a tie-in to the manga and anime series Fist of the North Star. The game is a sequel to the Mark III game Hokuto no Ken, released in North America for the Master System as Black Belt, as Sega never obtained a license to Fist of the North Star. The same reason applied to Last Battle. The game would soon see a release on the Amiga and Commodore 64 by Elite in Europe. Last Battle is a side-scrolling beat-em-up game, though it feels to me more like a poor version of Altered Beast. In the game, you control the warrior Arzak, or Kenshiro, in fighting off enemies over the course of 4 chapters. Complete levels in a certain order to complete the chapter. Take hits and your life gauge depletes. Once it's empty, it's game over. No extra lives, no continues. The controls are stiff. The sound effects are atrocious. The dialogue, which was inevitably done to replace the Fist of the North Star story, just felt too cliché. And when you hit an enemy, they simply fly off the screen. This is because in the Japanese version, the enemies explode. The localization was obviously rushed to meet launch day. On the plus side though, the game did have a world map that lets you choose your own path, similar to Super Mario Bros. 3. Plus, the graphics are okay for a game of its time. But none of the positives are enough to see past the negatives. Critics seem to agree. British magazine Mega ranked it number 2 in their list of the 10 worst Mega Drive games of all time, just behind Altered Beast, though I think Altered Beast shouldn't even be on that list. But I agree with them on how they rank Last Battle, no doubt about that. Thunder Force 2, a scrolling shooter and a sequel to the 1983 Sharp X1 game by Technosoft. Thunder Force 2 was previously released on the Sharp 68000 in Japan just 2 weeks before the launch of the Mega Drive. It hit the Mega Drive in July of 1989 with positive feedback from Famitsu magazine. In Thunder Force 2, the planet Nepura is invaded by the evil Oran Empire, who had attacked the Galaxy Federation and destroyed a planet with the battleship Plialos before taking over Nepura. Your goal is to pilot the space fighter Fire Leo O2 Exceliza so as to destroy Plialos and defeat the Empire. The 5 areas in this game are separated in 2 different missions. The first mission is known as Top View, which has an overhead view with free directional scrolling from the first game. The player must seek and destroy the cores of major enemy bases. Once those are cleared up, it's on to the second mission. Side View, played similar in fashion to your average side-scrolling shooter. This would go on to become the new norm for the Thunder Force series. At the end of each side view mission is a boss battle. Area 5 is the only one not to have a side view mission. Instead, it has 2 top view missions. Your ship comes equipped with default arsenal, complete with the forward-firing twin shot, the back shot, which fires 1 forward and 1 backward, and the short-range ground shot, which only works in the top view missions. You can also equip your ship with weapon upgrades dropped by destroyed enemies, which vary depending on the mission. Some of them disable the ground shot. Some of them even provide extra defenses. The faster a top view stage is finished, the more points you get. 20,000 points awards an extra life, and every time you get 50,000, you get another extra life. After beating all 5 stages, Plealos falls into the darkness, and the mission is complete. When Thunder Force 2 was released, reviews were favorable. Electronic Gaming Monthly gave it a score of 31 out of 40. Ed Simrad stated, "You haven't seen great graphics until you've seen Thunder Force 2. Easily the best visuals in a shoot 'em up. With both horizontal and vertical fighting sequences, the game has more than enough variety. Another example of how much better a 16-bit cart can be." Even though we've reached the end of the Genesis launch lineup, this was only the beginning for Sega's 16-bit machine. Gaming Delight will return in a moment.
Baseball is my life. Gotta start Oz. Hard hitter.
Game time, Tommy.
I'm on my way. Hit away.
Bases loaded, Tommy. What do we do?
Bunt. Shift over. Dead full hitter. Double play. What a game. And even my friend Arnie's got a great game. And I get a kick out of soccer and new basketball.
Game's over, Tommy.
Ain't over till it's over. Genesis by Sega. It's a whole new ball game.
Genesis does.
16-bit arcade graphics.
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis does.
16-bit arcade action.
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis
does.
Genesis
does.
Genesis
does.
Genesis
does.
Genesis does.
16-bit arcade hits.
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis does.
What Nintendo don't? The 16-bit Genesis system by Sega. Genesis does it all.
In Japan, the Mega Drive had superior power over NEC's PC Engine and Nintendo's Famicom, but in terms of sales, it fell behind both rival consoles. Meanwhile, in North America, the Sega Genesis was well ahead of the TurboGrafx 16, but it still lagged behind the Nintendo Entertainment System. Sales of the NES surged with games such as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, DuckTales, and Tetris. More Genesis titles started to trickle in by the end of 1989, including Ghouls and Ghosts. But the system wouldn't start gaining ground until the next year. Commercials began airing with the tagline, "Genesis does what Nintendo don't." And by 1991, Sega's release of Sonic the Hedgehog and Nintendo's launch of the Super Nintendo Entertainment System put the two companies at war. One primary key factor in advertising? Blast processing, a phrase coined by Scott Bayless, a producer at Sega of America. From 1991 to 1994, the Genesis would barely outsell the Super Nintendo every holiday season. Speaking of Sonic the Hedgehog, before the Super NES was released, newly appointed Sega of America president Tom Kalinske made a few suggestions. Drop the price of the Sega Genesis, replace Altered Beast with Sonic the Hedgehog as the bundled game, and launch an aggressive campaign to tackle Nintendo. With that, by the summer of 1991, the price of the Genesis was dropped from $190 to $150, and, as requested by Kalinske, Sonic the Hedgehog became the new packing game. In addition, anyone who purchased the Genesis with Altered Beast prior to the price cut were given a mail-in coupon, which gave them a free copy of Sonic the Hedgehog by mail. Over the years, Sega continued releasing accessories for the Genesis/Mega Drive. In 1990, Sega released the Mega Modem, a Japan-only device that allowed gamers to play certain games with others online. It hooked up to the expansion port on the back of Model 1 consoles. And speaking of the Model 1, later revisions of that model in North America removed the rear extension port. That didn't bode well for the modem. Of course, the late Model 1, nicknamed the Stinker, wasn't released in Japan. But what really cemented the end of the modem was the release of the Mega Drive 2 in April of 1993 in Japan. 4 months later, the new model was released in North America. For this model, the power switch has been replaced with a button, at least in the Western version. The headphone jack that outputs stereo sound is gone, but with the appropriate AV cables, it can actually output stereo sound without the headphone jack. Hardware add-ons and peripherals also came along to extend the life of the Genesis. Just after the Genesis was released in North America, Sega released an adapter that allowed gamers to play Master System games on the Genesis, the power-based converter. It plays almost the entire Master System library, though some games require a Master System controller to work, and an even smaller number of games don't work with the converter at all. In December of 1991, the Mega CD was released in Japan. It was an expensive yet technologically impressive add-on that played CD-based games. This meant enhanced graphics and CD-based audio. 9 months later, the device was released in North America as the Sega CD, priced at $300, about twice the price of the Genesis. The first model had a front-loading disc tray. The second model, released in 1993 to accommodate the Model 2 Genesis, had a top-loading disc tray and was $80 cheaper. Overall, the add-on was unsuccessful. Just over 2 million units were sold overall. In 1993, Sega released the Megajet, a handheld Mega Drive, to Japan Airlines flights. These would hook up to the LCD monitors in flight. Sega would release the Megajet to stores a year later. However, this handheld required a power supply rather than batteries. In 1994, Sega released the Multi-Mega, aka the CDX, an all-in-one system that played both cartridge games and CD games. In North America, it was priced at $400. At the time, the Genesis was priced at under $100, and the second model Sega CD sold for $220, but to have both in a single package was pretty appealing. However, even before the CDX, electronics manufacturer JVC had released their own all-in-one unit 2 years prior, the Victor Wonder Mega, but at a heftier price tag, nearly 83,000 yen. In 1993, they released a second model, the Wonder Mega M2, with a few fancy features removed to drop the price. In the spring of 1994, JVC released a modified Wonder Mega M2 in North America, the JVC XI, priced at $500. Only around 10,000 units were sold. In November of 1994, Sega put out the 32X, a mushroom-shaped add-on that played 32-bit cartridge games. Needless to say, it became a massive flop. It was initially priced at a hefty $160, but poor sales forced Sega to cut it to $100. As it was being discontinued, stores began selling their leftover stock for about $20. About 40 games were released for the add-on, including a handful that required both the 32X and the Sega CD. None of them helped to boost sales. In September of 1995, in an attempt to get ahead of the Game Boy after the Game Gear failed to do so, Sega released a handheld version of the Genesis exclusively in North America, the Genesis Nomad, which was similar to the Megajet but with a screen, and could run on batteries or external power. With the convenience of portability, as well as the ability to hook up to a TV, it was priced at $180, twice the price of a standalone Model 2 Genesis at the time. It lacked compatibility with the Sega CD, the 32X, and the power-based converter. It only sold over 1 million units. It was discontinued less than a year after release, and stores began selling their stock for as little as $40. In 1998, Majesco Entertainment, a publisher known for re-releasing 16-bit games, released the Genesis 3 at a price of $50. Sega would receive royalties for every unit sold, but this model lacked support for all Genesis add-ons, the game Genie, and games that utilized bugs from earlier models or external processors. Supposedly, this budget model was a way for Sega of America to rake in some cash after the Sega Saturn's failures, before the release of the Dreamcast. Overall, Sega sold over 30 million units of the Mega Drive/Genesis. It went on to become Sega's best-selling console of all time. Sadly, it never managed to completely outsell the Super Nintendo, which had overall sold close to 50 million consoles. But even after it was discontinued in 1997, the system's legacy would continue over the years. After Sega stopped making consoles, they released compilations of their best Genesis games for Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft's consoles, as well as PCs. Numerous individual Genesis games would see re-releases on Steam, Xbox Live Arcade, the PlayStation Network, and Nintendo's Wii, Wii U, and 3DS Virtual Console services, as well as Nintendo Switch Online. In 2019, in honor of the console's 30th anniversary in North America, Sega released the Genesis Mini, a plug-and-play system with 42 Genesis games built in. 3 years later, the Genesis Mini 2 was released, with over 50 games built in, including Sega CD games. Even some clones of the system would hit the market after patents expired, the most notable being the analog Mega SG, capable of playing Sega Genesis games out of the box, and with the included adapter, Master System games. It could even hook up to a Sega CD. Gaming Delight will wrap up in a moment with our special guest.
The Sega Genesis Mega Hits are here, and you can get one free. Check it out: Slam Dunk and Pat Riley basketball, Arcade Blockbuster Super Monaco GP, All-Pro Joe Montana football, the Ultimate Puzzle Game Columns, or James Buster Douglas Knockout Boxing. Your choice, free.
That's a great deal.
Pick one when you buy a Sega Genesis system between now and October 31st, up to a $50 value. Free! So buy a Genesis system now and get an extra game free. Hey, you can't do that on Nintendo. It's the Sega Summer Sizzle. Buy a Sega Genesis system before July 1st and get a free power base converter. It lets you play over 120 Sega Master and Genesis games. You also get an extra Genesis game or 2 Sega Master games, up to an $80 value. Free! Wait, you already own a Genesis system? Buy 2 Genesis games and choose either the power base converter, a 3rd Genesis game, or 2 Sega Master games. Free! It's summer, dudes. And this is hot.
I got a Sega Genesis for Christmas in 1989. I've been a Sega kid for the past, 4-ish years, after I opted for a Sega Master System thanks to the promise of some of my favorite arcade games ever coming home, specifically Space Harrier and Outrun. That initial year of the Sega Genesis was pretty incredible and contains some of my absolute favorite titles for the system. I always refer to this period as the Big Black Grid era, in reference to the black and white box design. Visually, this style remains totally iconic to me, and it was a perfectly stark antithesis to the Master System's relatively boring box art, which, to be fair, did get better over the years. But from the get-go, this set the standard for what the Sega Genesis was. It was something different than what came before. More mature and sleek. And including Altered Beast in the box was a brilliant move, especially for those who had fallen in love with these Sega System arcade games. I'm a big fan of Altered Beast, and I feel that it's unfairly criticized. It's a great showpiece for the power of the system, and I wonder how many consoles that single screenshot of the werewolf transformation on the box sold. It had to at least be in the hundreds. The first year of the system, though, was packed with some of the most timeless classics for the system, like Thunder Force 2, Revenge of Shinobi, and Golden Axe. But it was Ghouls and Ghosts, a port of the Capcom arcade game, that was the killer app. To this day, it might just be my favorite game on the system. It certainly has my favorite box art of all time. Sure, it's known for being brutally hard, but I've played it so much over the years that even doing a run on professional mode won't even cause me to break a sweat. Those early years of the Sega Genesis, though, to me, as a Sega fan, is the most special time in video games, where it felt like you could truly get the arcade experience at home for the first time, but also that anything was possible with this new generation of consoles. It was just really an incredible time to be a kid who loved video games.
Thanks, Coury, and it's an honor to have you on this channel again. Now, before we wrap up, here are my final thoughts. I remember when I first got my hands on a Sega Genesis controller. Back in the 90s, during the summer, my grandparents had a Genesis in the guest room. I think it was my cousin's. On that system, I played games like Sonic the Hedgehog, Mortal Kombat, and Joe Montana Football to help pass the time while I waited for meals. I can't remember which model they had, though. Maybe it was the Model 2. Anyway, I loved the Sega Genesis. So much so that in 1997, I wanted one just to play a Sonic game, despite knowing that Sega had already unceremoniously pulled the plug on the Genesis in 1996. I never did get one though, at least not back then. The closest I ever got was a Tiger Electronics handheld version of Sonic 3D Blast, which was okay for me, at least for a while. The only time I could ever play Sonic at home, on a regular basis, was when I got the Sonic Mega Collection for the GameCube in 2003. I'd been hooked ever since. It wasn't until 2019 when I got my own Sega Genesis, along with Sonic the Hedgehog, right here on the end of the shelf. To this day, I'm still collecting old Genesis games, including some Retrobit reproductions. And I might even get around to getting a flash cartridge like the Mega EverDrive Pro or the Mega SD. Well, that wraps up our Sega Genesis retrospective. Though it never outsold the Super NES, it proved that Nintendo wasn't the only big name in video games, even if Sega wasn't going to be on the console market for very long. But what do you think of the Genesis? Did you own one back in the day? And if so, what are your favorite games on it? And more importantly, what was your best experience with the system? Let me know in the comments. Thanks again for watching Gaming Delight. Until next time, happy gaming!